Day of elections, my lords, violence. Unprecedented violence, widely reported. 17 lives have been lost so far, election day and post-election. There is one photograph of, my lords, a person urinating, my lords, on the ballot box. This is really, my lords, defiling the democratic process beyond imagination.
Your prayer in the supplementary affidavit is for repoll.
Repolling, my lord, there are several points, my lord. Repolling also. My lord, post-poll violence still going on, my lord. Just after the result was published on yesterday, my lord, the opposition leader, their houses has been ransacked. They have been, my lord, threatened everywhere, my lord, everywhere. Their houses set fire, my lord, in many places. Few schools have been, my lord, the item where the booths were there, few schools, they have been ransacked. We want some compensation for those schools, my lord, because it is the hampering of education system also.
Yes, Advocate General, but all these people, everybody, the common complaint is still violence is going on. People are being beaten, things are being broken, bombs are being hurled.
I must say, my lords, that it's with a sense of distress that we are repeatedly coming to this honorable court, my lords, that the democratic process is getting undermined, my lords. That's really the problem. I'll tell my lord what the problem in our writ petition, what we are really now aggrieved about and what we are wanting to highlight. Day of elections, my lords, violence. Unprecedented violence, widely reported. I don't think it will be any ingenuous. 17 lives have been lost so far, election day and post-election. This is the first problem we have.
Total 37.
Number two, since the start of, my lords, the election process on the 8th or 9th, right from that day, my lords, until now, the numbers are much more. Now, it's one thing, my lords, because of my lord's benign indulgence at every stage, probably the numbers have gone down. But unfortunate truth is these acts of violence, intentional acts of violence, vandalism, have continued unabated. This is problem number one. Problem number two, my lords, is what is the effect this has had on the election? We have given instances, we have given photographs, my lords, of how much of violence has taken place by which ballot papers have been tampered with. There is one photograph of, my lords, a person urinating, my lords, on the ballot box. This is really, my lords, defiling the democratic process beyond imagination. I asked myself the question, what kind of effective steps were taken by the SEC, my lords? Surely the SEC must be called upon to give an answer report as to what kind of steps were taken, where appropriate, given instructions for deployment of the central forces. Initially, the stand, my lords, was that no need for any central forces, we'll take care of everything. Then they said 22 companies. Then they said 822. They scaled it up to 822. Then they complained saying that only 300 or 350 are coming. Then the entire complement was made available. After all that, they owe it to my lords to say what kind of instructions were given for deployment and what steps were taken to prevent all of this. Then, my lords, during the transfer of the ballot papers, during the counting process, which seems to be underway even now, there have been problems. In fact, in our writ petition, we have catalogued the problems, some of the major problems which are there. Please come to my writ petition from page 17 onwards, 16, 17 onwards. We have given instance after instance. The petitioners state at this juncture the various instances of electoral malpractices and the violence which was perpetrated during the entire electoral process, and more specifically on the 8th of July, as a consequence of which 17 lives were lost, and the electoral process was exactly opposite to what was envisaged by this honorable court in the various orders passed in the public interest litigations moved before this honorable court prior to the elections. It was widely reported in the press that at various booths across the state, ballot boxes were looted and thrown into ponds, ballot papers were burnt, and there were also instances of antisocial elements intimidating presiding officers and running away with ballot boxes. Various instances of continuous false voting were also reported by the mainstream media from various locations. There were certain booths in Diamond Harbour. We have localized, my lords, some of those instances where antisocial elements affiliated to the ruling dispensation in the state resorted to false voting by keeping the polling party and the police officials posted therein at gunpoint. Thereafter, at so-and-so, booth number 1 witnessed a strange phenomenon where the presiding officer himself was dictating people where to put the stamp of mandate on the ballot paper. It was also reported at some blocks that a single person put his thumb impression and cast several hundred votes, thereby committing malpractice. As a matter of fact, police personnel were themselves not safe, which is evident from the fact that certain police officers sustained injury in Malda. Vote looting was also reported at village so-and-so. Then agent of so-and-so was killed inside a booth at Kuch, Bihar. False voting and electoral malpractices were also reported from such and such a place. Again, we have given the details. Then false voting reported from another place. Most shocking incident was that a photograph was clicked where a miscreant was seen urinating of a ballot box and making a mockery of the sacred democratic festival. This just goes on, my lords. We have given all the details. Now, there is one other important aspect I want to highlight here, my lords. The State Election Commission itself considered it necessary and appropriate to order re-election in about 600 or 700 booths. In fact, we made representations on the day of polling that so much of violence and booth capturing and rigging and all the other problems have taken place. Therefore, there ought to be re-polling in manifold more number of booths.
50,000, I have said.
In fact, they have said 50,000, but with a sense of proportionality, my lords, we have come before this honorable court. We have given Annexure 8. We have said at least in 6,000 more booths, there has to be re-polling. Therefore, the SEC has to tell my lords on what basis re-polling was ordered, and that too only in 600 booths.
Yes.
What is the basis on which they ordered deployment? What were the instructions for deployment of forces? What steps were taken? When were the instructions given? Surely, my lords, it is not as though the proceedings which are taking place and some undertakings are given or directions are issued. They ought to be followed in this letter and spirit.
One policeman was also injured.
Yes. No.
And my lord, one point is that those booths in which process the murder was happened, no repolling order was there. They have captured those booths from first hour of the voting, my lord, on a my lord.
In fact,
I have annexed, my lord.
It appears repolling has been ordered in booths where probably it's not warranted at all.
Yes.
My lord.
Yes.
6,000 we have identified instances where incidents have occurred. No, SEC ought to give an explanation what really is happening and what has happened. Now,
That 6,000 booths you have identified.
yes, please see Annexure 8, my lords, in my petition to the Commissioner, West Bengal State Election Commission. I'm reading from 189.
Yes.
This is on 8/7, the date of polling itself. We do not have any words to describe the complete failure of the Commission to conduct a free and fair poll, maintaining its purity as repeatedly ordered by the High Court. Just on polling day, 17 precious human lives were lost. Widespread rigging, in many instances with active participation of polling officer, non-deployment of any force, state and central. Despite court orders, civic volunteers were used. Accordingly, we demand re-poll be announced in all booths. Polling officers seen participating and helping in rigging where BJP candidates and agents were forced to leave or removed from polling stations. Attached to the list of booths compiled by us as of now, more details are being sent to respective district magistrates by our district officers. The incidents of violence, booth capturing, intimidating, using of arms, etc. were so huge that it is still taking a time to compile the same. Since last night, the TMC has inflicted another round of reign of terror, burning houses, looting shops, kidnapping our candidates, agents, resulting in many people being forced to flee from their homes. This is further delaying the process of compiling the list. Under the circumstances, we demand that the counting date delayed so that there is time to make proper assessment of re-poll required. Else, it will be a farcical exercise, which will be a final blow to the panchayat gram elections of 2023. Then, my lords, this list is attached, where we have given details as have been collected as on that date.
Yes.
This is the repo. This is the list of the booths where repolling was ordered by the SEC. We have, in fact, video footages. We'll file it. People will take responsibility for it, file an affidavit, but we can just show what is the kind of violence which has occurred. Really mind-boggling, to say the least. Very unfortunate. That's why I started with saying, my lords, that's why I said it's distressing that the democratic process is being undermined.
On 8th evening, after the poll is over, the media, there was a press conference made by the chairman of the SEC. He was asked by the media that there's so much of death, 17 persons died on the day of polling, there were bullet injury. He said in Bengali that ke kothay guli marbe ami ki janbo, eta ki amar daitto. That means who will fire bullet where? Is it my responsibility? But he was in charge of the law and order, and he said that if this is the attitude, then many more persons will die in Bengal.
But later I have wrote, my lord, I also requested, my lord, to attach, my lord, these things, because what have been happened, my lord, he is also a part of that. So FIR should be lost against him and his men and agents also. I have taken this point, and those booths, my lord, the rigging was done in those booths, no repolling, no order of repolling by the...
Which is this booth?
Lord, we have mentioned in our Lord, from my personal side, I can say one of my relatives, Lord, he was there in the duty. Somewhere, Lord, in Hooghly, he called me and said, "What is the order that you got?" I said, "Why?" He called me on 7th night. He said that today the local persons came. They said, "We have to go to some other places. We'll cast a vote today only." So 7th night only they did everything, locked the ballot boxes and left, because they had to go and make chappa vote in other booths on the next. This is the situation. Ballot boxes are put to fire. They are playing football here.
No central force in almost 50,000 booths. That's why we have wanted the repolling of in 50,000 booths. We have not seen any at least one central force.
See, they are playing football.
All these have identified.
Lord, the presiding officers are found to be crying, seeking for help. I have a video. One policeman is saying that please rescue us.
Before order, yesterday at the counting booth, they started beating. And homes were thrown out at the counting booth yesterday by the ruling party members.
What surprise is waiting for your lordship, sir?
Opposition.
Mr. Chatterjee said, Mr. Soposai Chatterjee informed me that he has a ballot box now with him. That was thrown out somewhere. Somebody has given it to him. He's bringing to court. Can you see it yourself? What is happening? Take note of this. He has a ballot box full of ballots. I have asked him to bring it. I don't know how this can happen and how the state election commissioner can say that he has performed his duty.
At the least, there ought to be some kind of preliminary inquiry into these acts of violence, my lord, by a central agency investigating. This calls for this. There ought to be some kind of CBI inquiry, preliminary inquiry into all this. Some report has to come from an outside agency. Number one. Two, a report of the SEC answering how all this has happened and what kind of steps have been taken. And number three, what instructions were given for deployment of central forces? What instructions were given, and if instructions were given, when?
For that, we have called for a report both from the...
Yes, and two more things I want to highlight, my lords. The issue of repoll is something which seriously, my lords, has to be considered by this honorable court, because what has really happened is no poll at all. Surely the SEC cannot surely pick and choose and decide I will order in ABCD, so that there is some kind of a facade and a farce of an exercise being undertaken to show as though that he has taken cognizance of all the problems which have occurred. What about all the other places, and what is the basis on which certain areas were chosen and certain were not chosen? There had to be an answer given for that. And how can, my lords, any kind of finality be given to these polling actions, these so-called polling actions? They cannot declare the results and say there is a fait accompli. There has to be some kind of an interdict, my lords, to this.
My lord, no, what is happening? A person is being declared as winner. After that, the MLS comes, snatch the neck of that person and forcing the presiding officer that don't give the certificate. You can't issue. And there is a complaint against one of the MLA of Shakrai, Priya Pal. She went yesterday, last night. That particular Gram Panchayat was owned by CPIM. And she went there, captured that place and ransacked the place and beaten up the agents of the party badly. There have been repeated complaints to the DM. No response. These are happening everywhere.
So many new things have come.
Nothing has.
Restore it. The state shall repair and restore the institution and recover it from them.